My FIANCÉE and her coach locked me out of the gym we built, laughed while I froze, then left an emotional support invoice on my desk. So I exposed them, took the gym back, and left her in the snow with my signature. The wind stung my face like needles as I stood outside the glass vestibule of the compound, fist red from knocking. My breath fogged the surface, making it harder to see, but I could still make them out. Sienna, my fiancée, laughing with her coach and team, basking in the warmth inside. I slammed my fist against the glass one more time, harder than I meant to. A guy from the team, I think his name was Decker, looked right at me and mouthed, "Find a real team." Then he smirked and turned away. Sienna caught my eye. I raised my eyebrows, mouthed, "Open the door." She just shrugged. I stood there a second longer, snow biting at my neck, unsure if I'd misread something. Maybe this was a joke. Maybe someone would open the door any second and say, "Gotcha." But they didn't. It had taken me 3 flights, a 2-hour shuttle ride, and a snowshoe trudge just to get here from my latest high-altitude expedition in Chile. I'd been sleeping on ice shelves, eating freeze-dried oatmeal, and risking my life for weeks. I was exhausted. All I wanted was a hot shower and my own bed at the training facility Sienna and I co-owned, used to co-own, apparently. My fingers curled around the cold metal handle again, yanking at it pointlessly. Locked? I pulled out my keycard and swiped it against the reader, just in case. The red light blinked twice. Access denied. What the hell? I pounded again, this time using the side of my fist. "Sienna!" I shouted. "What's going on?" She glanced over her shoulder, hesitated for a moment, then turned back to her group. High-fived the coach. Took a swig from her water bottle like nothing was wrong. That's when it hit me. This wasn't a miscommunication. This wasn't a mistake. This was intentional. I stepped back, stunned. The compound wasn't just a gym. It was our shared dream, our investment, our home base. We built it together. Every crash pad, every anchor bolt, every climbing hold. We chose them as a team. But somewhere in the last year, things had shifted. Her elite climbing team started temporarily using more space, bringing in new coaches, adjusting the training schedule without asking me. I chalked it up to growth. I thought we were on the same page. Apparently not. The glass between us suddenly felt thicker than bulletproof. Decker glanced at me again, smirked, and threw a chalk bag in the air like a victory flag. "He finally gets it," I heard him say, muffled but clear enough. I wanted to scream. Instead, I stepped back, took one last look through the window at the place I used to belong, and turned away. As I trudged down the snowy hill with my pack on my back, the gym behind me faded into the gray. My body was numb from the cold, but inside, everything was burning. That was the moment I realized something I didn't want to admit yet. I wasn't locked out of a building. I was being exiled from my own life. I hiked 5 miles to the nearest ranger outpost, the only thing with a roof and 4 walls for at least 10 miles. By the time I reached it, my gloves were soaked through and my feet were blocks of ice. The ranger who let me in didn't ask questions, just handed me a key to the supply shelter around back and a box of granola bars. The shelter had no heat, just a cot and a lantern that flickered like it was on its last legs. But I wasn't picky. I curled up under a wool blanket and tried to warm up while the wind howled against the wooden walls. Sleep came in short, shivering bursts. By morning, the storm had moved on, but I hadn't. I hadn't even moved an inch toward understanding what the hell had just happened. I used the landline at the main outpost to call the only person who came to mind, Lark. We hadn't talked in almost a year, not since she moved to Boulder and left the gym under tense circumstances. She used to be my climbing partner before Sienna and I got serious, and for a while, the 3 of us had been close. Then the team started pushing her out too. "Jaden," she said, picking up on the second ring. "You okay?" "Not really," I said. "I need a couch. Just for a couple days." "Come stay as long as you want," she replied instantly. "Seriously. I've got a futon in the gear room. And beer." I took the bus down the mountain into Boulder, wearing the same thermal layers I'd slept in for weeks. When I got to her apartment, I handed over my phone and tablet like they were radioactive. "Turn them off," I said. "If I look at one more message from anyone on that team, I'll throw this thing out a window." Lark didn't press. She powered them down and shoved them in a drawer. The next couple days were quiet in a way I didn't realize I needed. Lark gave me space. I made ramen on her stove and slept like the dead. I stared at the ceiling a lot. And I thought about how it had all changed. How Sienna's coach had gradually taken over our programming. How I'd been cut out of meetings. How one by one, the climbers I'd mentored started referring to me as her fiancé like that was my only title. And how I'd ignored it. I told myself it would pass. That Sienna was just focused. That the team was just intense. But now, sitting on a beanbag in Lark's apartment, surrounded by her plants and old climbing magazines, I felt something unexpected. Clarity. They hadn't just locked me out of the gym. They'd spent a whole year erasing me. And I'd let them. On the 3rd morning, I cracked. Lark had gone out for a training run, and the apartment was silent except for the hum of the refrigerator. I pulled my tablet out of the drawer and stared at the black screen for a full minute before turning it on. 53 notifications. My stomach sank. I didn't even open the group chats at first. I scrolled past them to my email, 7 missed calendar alerts, including 2 sponsorship calls and a media interview I'd apparently ghosted. My agent had sent me 3 increasingly panicked messages with subject lines like, "Where are you?" and "Need to confirm today." Then I opened the texts. The team chat had blown up the night I disappeared. At first, it was jokes. Decker posted a photo of the vestibule with the caption, "Guess the mountain boy didn't make the cut." Someone else replied with a gif of someone freezing outside in the snow. But by the next morning, it had turned. Sienna's coach, Bryce, had sent a long, scathing message accusing me of being emotionally volatile and unable to handle constructive pressure. He claimed I'd abandoned my commitments, flaked on joint obligations, and jeopardized the team's brand. I kept reading. Sienna had posted once in the thread, "Let's not pile on. Jaden's probably just decompressing." And that was it. Individually, though, the tone shifted again. I had messages from sponsors asking where I'd gone. From our joint PR contact wondering why my part of the campaign video hadn't been submitted. And then came the personal texts from Sienna herself. At first, she was defensive. "This is getting blown out of proportion. You overreacted. Come back and talk like adults." Then later, "People are freaking out. Can we just talk? Please. Just you and me. Not the whole team." And finally, "Let's meet. You. Me. Summit Cafe. Tomorrow." I stared at the blinking cursor in the reply box for a long time. Then I typed, "You. Me. Summit Cafe. Tomorrow." No, coach. I hit send. I set the tablet face down and stared out the window. For the first time in weeks, I wasn't climbing anything, training, or planning the next summit. But I'd never felt more sure of my next move. They wanted to control the narrative. Fine. But this time, I was telling my part of the story. On my terms. The Summit Cafe was halfway up the canyon road, tucked between a gear rental shop and an old outfitter's cabin. I got there 20 minutes early and sat at a booth by the window, nursing a black coffee I didn't really want. I kept my eyes on the door. 10 minutes passed. Then 5. Right on the dot, the door opened, and in walked Sienna. Not alone. She had Decker with her. 2 other teammates. And Bryce. Of course, Bryce. I stared at them as they filed in like they were arriving for a press event. Sienna gave me a sheepish smile, like she was about to explain away a scheduling mix-up. "Hey," she said, slipping into the seat across from me. Bryce sat next to her like a guard dog. I didn't speak. Decker took the seat beside me. I stood. "Nope," I said. "You're not invited." Sienna held up her hands. "Jaden, I know what you said, but..." "You knew exactly what I said." Bryce leaned in, tone oily. "We're here to keep this professional, Jaden. You've gone dark for days and left quite a mess behind." I pulled out a folder from my backpack and set it on the table. "You want professional? Let's go." Sienna blinked. "What is that?" "Bank records," I said. Proof that sponsor money meant for joint use was redirected into a separate account. I tapped the folder. "Yours. And the team's." Decker snorted. "Dude, you think we're stealing from you?" "I don't think," I said. "I know." I pulled out the statements. Line by line, I laid them out. Monthly deposits meant for the gym, split into a new account listed under Sienna's LLC. Withdrawals for team trips. Team gear. Bryce's coaching fee. No gym maintenance. No rent. Bryce scoffed. "You never carried your weight anyway. Let's not pretend you were a team player." I pulled out my phone and hit play on a short audio clip. The cafe went quiet. It was my voice from the night I was locked out. Me pounding on the glass. Then laughter. Bryce's voice, clear as day. Let him freeze. Maybe he'll finally get the message. Sienna's laugh followed. So did Decker's. Then the voice I'd been waiting for. Sienna, again, joking. "He's not built for this level. We need to move forward." When it ended, the silence felt heavier than any snowfall. Sienna opened her mouth. Closed it. "I'm not here to play the victim," I said. "I'm here to give you 3 things." I raised a finger. 1. Full restitution of the diverted funds. All of it. A second finger. 2. Your team vacates the gym in 5 days. You'll find your own space. A third. 3. Sienna, you go to counseling. Alone. Because I don't think you even understand what you let happen. Bryce started to speak. I turned to him. "You can stop talking now." No one argued. Sienna's eyes were glassy. She looked like she wanted to explain, but knew better than to try. I stood, scooping the papers into my backpack. This isn't revenge. This is recovery. Then I left the cafe, not looking back. The air outside was thin and cold, but I could breathe. They left early. 3 days after the cafe meeting, I drove up to the gym with a checklist in my pocket and Quartz's leash looped around my wrist. The parking lot was empty. The snow from last week had melted into slush, Entire tracks carved long muddy lines away from the entrance. They were gone. But the damage wasn't. Inside, the first thing I noticed was the silence. The place used to buzz, chalk dust in the air, the thud of crash pads, someone always laughing near the hangboards. Now it felt gutted. Literally. Posters torn from the walls. Every hold on the main boulder wall had been loosened, left spinning in their bolts. One of the ropes had been cut, not frayed, not worn, but sliced clean through with a knife. My gear, what was left of it, sat in a tangled heap near the front desk. My old climbing shoes were soaked and crammed in a garbage bag. My logbooks were ripped in half. A torn banner that used to say Welcome to Summit Corps now just read Welcome to Sue. I walked to my office and found a single envelope on my desk, my name scrawled in Sienna's handwriting. I sat down, opened it, and stared at the contents. An itemized bill. A debt ledger. She had listed every training session she ever coached me through. Every shared trip, dinner, gear purchase. She even included emotional support hours, no joke, at $75 each. Totaled it all at the bottom. $28,000 and change. I stared at the paper for a long moment. Then I laughed. Not because it was funny. Because it was pathetic. Because this is what it had come to. They hadn't just left. They wanted the last word. Even now, after being exposed, they couldn't walk away with dignity. They had to twist the knife. I tore the ledger in half, then again, and dropped it into the trash. Then I got to work. First thing I did was change the entry codes. The locks. The Wi-Fi password. I walked the perimeter, checking every window, every exit. I took photos of every scuffed wall, every broken fixture, every damaged hold for legal records, in case I needed them. And when I finished, I stood in the center of the main gym floor, looked up at the ceiling, and exhaled. It was hollow now, but it was mine again. No more echoes of someone else's team. No more shared anything. Just a big empty space and the chance to start over. It was just above freezing when I met her at the trailhead. The parking lot was empty except for her SUV and my truck. Pine needles crunched under my boots as I crossed the gravel. Sienna stood near the picnic table, bundled in a black parka, her eyes red and puffy like she hadn't slept in days. She didn't speak right away, just stared at the frozen ground. "Thanks for coming," she said finally, barely above a whisper. "I almost didn't," I replied. She nodded like she expected that. We stood there in silence for a while, the wind rustling the evergreens. It felt like we were about to start a hike we'd never finish. "I didn't plan for it to go like that," she said. I stayed quiet. Sienna rubbed her hands together, not for warmth but nerves. The lockout, it wasn't just a cruel prank. Bryce called it a mental toughness test. Said if you really wanted to be part of the team, you'd find a way in. Prove your commitment. I looked at her then. "You locked me out of our own gym to test my loyalty?" "I didn't stop it," she admitted. "That's on me. I let him convince me that we had to weed out weakness. That you were too soft." I scoffed. "You mean, too human?" She swallowed hard. "I thought you'd fight your way back in. That you'd laugh it off and then get even tougher. I didn't realize what we were doing until I saw you through the glass." "And you shrugged," I reminded her. She looked up at me, eyes brimming. I didn't know how to stop it. I felt like if I went against the team, I'd lose everything I'd built. "You mean everything we built?" Her face crumpled. "I used to think I chose you because you were grounded. Kind. Stable. But the truth is, I chose you because you were malleable. Because you let me lead," she said. "And I let other people twist that into something ugly." I stepped back, putting space between us. "You could have told me. At any point. You could have stood up." "I know," she whispered. I stared at the tree line behind her. The place where the trail disappeared into the woods. "I loved you," I said. "Not the image, not the brand you. But you made me feel like a guest in my own life." "I'm sorry," she said, tears now sliding down her cheeks. "I don't know how to fix this." "You don't," I said. "This isn't something you fix. This is something you let go." I pulled an envelope from my coat pocket and handed it to her. Legal papers. Dissolution of partnership, personal and business. She didn't reach for it. "I already signed," I said. "All you have to do is finish it." She took it with trembling hands. "I hope you find yourself," I added. "The real you. Not the one your coach shaped." Then I walked away, leaving her standing in the cold with her regret and my signature. For the first time, I didn't look back. Tamsin met me at a cafe on the south side of Boulder, quiet place, old climbing photos on the walls, a retired crash pad repurposed as a bench cushion. She looked different than I remembered. Hair shorter, shoulders stronger, like someone who had finally stepped out of a storm and was learning how to enjoy the sun again. "You look good," I said. She gave me a tired smile. "So do you." Considering. We hadn't spoken much since she left the gym nearly 2 years ago. Back then, she and Bryce had clashed over training methods. He claimed she wasn't mentally aligned with the elite mindset. She left before things could get worse. I thought she was being dramatic. Now I knew better. "I heard what happened," she said, sipping her coffee. "Locked you out?" "Damn. Yeah," I said. That was just the grand finale. It had been building for a while. She nodded. That's what he does. Bryce doesn't just coach. He controls. Breaks people down until they think he's the only reason they succeed. I pulled a folder from my bag and handed it to her. Inside were copies of everything. Bank records, the audio file from the lockout, and screenshots of Bryce's messages. I'd been collecting them for weeks. Quietly. Deliberately. Tamsin flipped through it slowly. This is solid. I want to bring it forward, I said. Publicly. At the regional banquet. Her eyes flicked up. You serious? As a heart attack. She leaned back in her chair. That's not just a team dinner. That's every coach, sponsor, and gym owner in a 100-mile radius. Bryce will try to shut you down. I know, I said. That's why I want you up there with me. Tamsin hesitated. You really think it'll make a difference? I think there are other climbers who've been quiet because they thought no one would believe them, or they didn't want to lose opportunities. I'm not trying to burn the sport down. I just want the rot out of it. She stared at the folder again. It's about time. We spent the rest of the afternoon making a list of who to talk to. Old teammates. Former sponsors. People Bryce had pushed out of the sport or gaslit into silence. For the first time since the lockout, I felt less alone. Less like a victim and more like someone building a rope line for others to follow. This wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about accountability. And the climb back up was just beginning. The banquet hall was all polished hardwood and LED uplighting, like a wedding reception waiting for a toast. Climbers milled around in Patagonia vests and sport coats, name tags clipped awkwardly to button-downs. A projection screen behind the podium flashed slides of past events, regional highlights, sponsorship stats, glossy team photos. I waited near the back with Tamsin, the folder tucked under my arm, heart thudding like I was on a sheer rock face with no anchor. When my name was called during the legacy and leadership portion of the night, a few polite claps went up. I walked to the mic. I didn't smile. I didn't fake charm. I cleared my throat. Thanks for the invite, I said. I wasn't sure I'd show, but I'm glad I did. Because we need to talk. A murmur spread across the room. Bryce, sitting at a table near the front, straightened in his seat. Sienna was next to him, her eyes wide. I looked out at the audience. Some of you know me as a climber. Some as a coach. Some as the guy who used to co-run Summit Corps. But tonight, I'm here as something else, a witness. I opened the folder and took out a single page. For the last year, my training facility was used by Bryce Maddox and his elite climbing team. During the time, funds meant for joint operations were rerouted. Athletes were manipulated. And climbers, myself included, were emotionally isolated and pushed to the brink. Bryce stood up. This is slander, he barked. You don't get to hijack this. I held up a hand, calm. You'll get your turn. I'm just getting started. Tamsin stepped up beside me, her voice steady. This isn't just Jaden's story. I left the sport for 2 years after Bryce called me uncoachable and told sponsors I lacked discipline. I thought it was me, but it wasn't. More murmurs now. A few heads turned toward their tables, whispers spreading. We have bank statements, I continued. Recordings. Screenshots. And now we have testimonials. Not just from us, but from 6 other athletes who worked with Bryce and left the sport with burnout, debt, or worse. Bryce pushed forward, voice rising. This is a coordinated attack. None of this is... A voice cut in from the crowd. It's true. Everyone turned. It was Jess Leong, former national youth medalist, now coaching part-time at a local rec center. He told me I was only good for media because I looked the part. When I got injured, he stopped returning my messages. Said I wasn't worth the investment. Another voice followed. And another. Climbers stood one by one, sharing small, sharp moments, contracts rewritten without their input, promised stipends that vanished, training pushed through illness or injury. The air shifted. Then a sponsor rep from Northridge Gear stood up and said, We'll be pausing all funding to the Maddox program pending investigation. Bryce's face drained of color. Sienna stood quietly beside him. She didn't defend him. She didn't say anything at all. Instead, after a long beat, she stepped away from him. I'm leaving the team, she said. Her voice trembled, but it carried. I don't know who I became, but I don't want to be that person anymore. Nobody clapped. Nobody cheered. It wasn't that kind of moment. It was heavier than that. Like a mountain breaking apart, rock by rock, until the old path was gone and something clearer emerged. I stepped back from the mic. Tamsin put a hand on my shoulder. We didn't need to say anything else. The room had already heard everything that mattered. The first morning after the banquet, I drove up to the gym with a fresh set of keys and a new nameplate in my glove box. Summit Corps was no more. I pulled the old signage down with a cordless drill, tossed it into the dumpster behind the building, and bolted up a new one. Co-op climb boulder. It wasn't sleek or trendy. Just honest. Inclusive. Local. By the end of the week, the place had color again. Lark brought in rugs for the lounge and stacked second-hand books about climbing, mindfulness, and trauma recovery on the coffee table. Tamsin reinstalled the boulder holds one by one, double-checking each bolt like she was laying the foundation for something sacred. We started hosting open climbs every Wednesday night. No team rosters, no fees, no judgment. Just a beat-up stereo, free snacks, and a wall full of routes made by community members, not egos. The day our first open group arrived, I stood back and watched them. Teenagers with mismatched chalk bags, a dad climbing with his 8-year-old, a woman in scrubs still wearing her hospital badge. They weren't elite, but their joy was real. Quartz, my new rescue mutt, lay curled on a folded crash pad by the window, snoring gently. I had picked him up from a local shelter 2 weeks ago. He was 13, slow, and half-deaf, but he followed me around the gym like he was protecting a kingdom. People loved him. They'd give him belly rubs between climbs, and he'd wag his tail in these little, uneven loops like it surprised him every time. The gym was no longer a fortress. It was a home. At first, I still checked my phone out of habit, half expecting another message from Sienna or Bryce or some forgotten sponsor trying to repair their image. But nothing came. Eventually, I turned off the push notifications entirely. I stopped wondering what Sienna was doing, whether she really left the sport or just slipped into another role, another team, another version of herself that used to consume me, what she'd post, who she'd tag, if I'd ever really mattered. No, I didn't care. I had pain under my fingernails, a workshop full of beat-up gear waiting to be fixed, and a calendar that finally felt like mine. Every so often, someone would ask if I still climbed. Yeah, I'd say, but not for points, not for medals, not for approval. These days, I climb because it feels like breathing. And for the first time in a long, long time, I can finally breathe deep. 1 month after the blizzard, I returned to the ridge that broke me. It was a solo route I tried twice before, both times with Sienna pacing below, calling up Beta like a coach instead of a partner. I never made it past the crux. Fell hard the first time. Froze up the second. But today, it was just me. No one at the base. No spotlights. No performance metrics. Just a cloudless Colorado sky and the quiet creak of the harness as I clipped in. Quartz stayed behind in the truck, curled up with a blanket and a chew toy shaped like a carabiner. I gave him a pat and promised to be quick. The granite was cold at first, but my hands warmed as I moved. No chalk marks, no polished footholds, just raw rock and instinct. I didn't rush. I didn't chase a time. Halfway up, my calf started to cramp, and for a second, I thought about turning back. But then I breathed and moved through it. No coach yelling corrections. No Sienna analyzing my balance. Just the wind, the sky, my own rhythm. I cleared the crux slower than I ever had on a route. But I cleared it. Step by step, finger jam by shaky toe hook, until the ridge curved out and the summit opened up like the first page of a new chapter. I hauled myself over the lip and sat down hard, my chest rising and falling like I'd just come out of water. It wasn't dramatic. No cheers. No tears. Just me, the wind, and the sound of my own heartbeat in my ears. I reached into my jacket pocket and pulled out a small, jagged stone I'd kept since the day of the lockout, when I picked up from the snow outside the glass doors. On its surface, I had written in Sharpie, "We don't escape the cold, we learn to move through it." It was from my favorite book, one I used to carry in my pack back in the early days, when climbing still felt like freedom. I placed the rock at the summit, wedged it in a crevice near the cairn. Then I stood, turned in a slow circle, and let the mountain air fill my lungs. No weight on my shoulders. No ghosts at my heels. No audience. Just clear skies and a man finally at peace with the climb.